If you have ever felt underestimated by your own family, this story is for you. And if you have ever trusted a kind gesture that later felt like a trap, stay to the end. A quick favor for the algorithm. Support this story wherever you listen to it, and leave a comment with where you are watching from. Someone else out there is walking into the same door I walked into, and they do not know it yet. My name is Thomas Tom Halstead, 72 years old, American, retired quality control supervisor from an appliance factory outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 41 years of inspecting parts trained my eyes to look for tiny inconsistencies, the sort of hairline crack that ruins a whole batch, the microscopic mismatch between what a label claims and what the metal actually is. The most dangerous flaws are the ones that look perfect. My wife Lorna passed 3 months before my uncle died. Cancer. Quiet, relentless, unfair. The kind of illness that turns a calendar into an enemy. The house never fully recovered from the hospital smell that followed us home from late-night visits. Even after the medical equipment disappeared, the room where she spent her last weeks stayed shaped like a memory. Grief rearranged my routine. Food lost its flavor. Sleep turned into fragments. The daily walk became the only part of the day that still felt like mine. My children lived far enough away to miss the small shifts. My daughter, Claire, worked in Dallas and carried the kind of job that fills weekends with conferences. My son, Mark, lived near Tampa and managed a logistics crew that never stopped moving. They checked in. They meant well. Distance still does what distance does. Then my phone buzzed with a number from Ohio and a name I had not heard in 20 years. Uncle Ray, Raymond Halstead, my father's older brother, a man built from stubbornness and silence, the kind of person who could sit at a table for an hour without moving and still dominate the room. I had not seen him since my mother's funeral, because Ray treated family like a duty and affection, like a currency he refused to spend. The voicemail was short. A funeral home, a request for next of kin, a service scheduled in 2 days in a small town outside Toledo, a long drive for a man who had never felt welcome in that man's life. I went anyway. The road across Pennsylvania into Ohio looked the same as it always did, gray skies and winter bare trees. The farther west I drove, the flatter the land became, like the world had been ironed smooth. I kept thinking about the last time I saw Ray, a handshake with no warmth, a single sentence about responsibility, and a look that felt like a verdict. At the funeral home, I found an empty chapel and a polite director who spoke carefully, the way people do around death and unknown family dynamics. The front row held a single wreath and a framed photo of Ray in a hunting jacket, a half smile caught in mid-thought. The photo looked recent. It surprised me. Ray never liked pictures. A few older locals sat in the back, acquaintances rather than family. No cousins, no siblings, no children. Ray never married. No one spoke about him like they truly knew him, only like they knew his reputation. After the service, the funeral director guided me to a side office. Paperwork, signatures, receipts, a small stack of documents that needed an heir's name. Then another item appeared on the desk, separate from the official forms. A black USB drive with a silver ring on the end. The ring had a tiny engraving, RH. The director explained that it had arrived the day before in a padded envelope without a return address. The envelope had been delivered by a local courier. Inside, the drive and a note. The note carried one line in blocky printed letters. For the family. Play it at the service. The director had not played it. Too late to set up the projector. Too few attendees. The director still handed it over because it felt like something meant for an heir. The drive felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but emotionally, like a small object loaded with intention. In the parking lot, I sat in my old sedan and stared at the drive on the passenger seat. The day felt cold enough to bite. I could still smell funeral flowers in my jacket. The sky hung low over the asphalt. For the family. Ray had not acted like he wanted family. Someone else did. Back home in Pennsylvania, I waited until evening. The house stayed quiet. The kind of quiet that makes even appliances sound loud. I brewed coffee I did not want, turned on a lamp, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Lorna's mug still sat in its usual place, untouched. The drive slid into the USB port. A folder opened automatically. A single file sat inside. Memorial_slideshow_final.mp4a file name that felt too polished for Ray. Ray barely used email. I clicked play. Soft piano music. A title card with Ray's name, dates, a simple white font on a black background. Then photos began, fading in and out. Ray at a cabin, Ray in a truck, Ray holding a fish, Ray beside a fireplace with a drink in hand. Then Ray with people. A young woman with bright eyes and a friendly smile standing near him with a hand on his shoulder. A young man in a baseball cap beside Ray at what looked like a backyard cookout. A child on Ray's lap with a paper crown. A group shot at a holiday table, Ray in the center, a plate in front of him, a warm lamp glow on everyone's faces. The slideshow kept moving, photo after photo, and my stomach tightened with each new frame. Ray had people. Ray had a life. Ray had a family orbit that I never knew existed. Part of me felt guilt. Another part felt suspicious. Suspicion did not arrive out of cruelty. It arrived out of experience. Ray's personality and these photos did not match. Ray was not a warm social grandfather type. Ray was a solitary man who complained about neighbors and refused invitations. The photos looked too curated, too perfect, too cinematic. Then one photo arrived that snapped my attention into a cold, focused place. Ray at a graveside, standing with the same young woman, both in dark coats, both looking down at a headstone. A bouquet rested near the stone. Ray's face looked softer than I had ever seen it. I paused the video. The headstone showed a name carved into granite. A date, a small emblem. My mother's name, my mother's headstone. My mother's funeral had taken place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The cemetery was not in Ohio. The headstone in the photo, however, belonged to my mother. The stone's distinctive pattern, the little nick on the top right edge, the emblem my father insisted on, a simple cross within a circle. I knew that stone like a scar. My chest went tight. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. I zoomed in on the frame until it pixelated. The name matched. The dates matched. The headstone matched. The background did not. The trees behind the grave looked wrong. The fence line looked wrong. The slope of the hill looked wrong. My mother's grave sat near a flat section with 3 maple trees and a low stone wall. The photo showed evergreen shadows and a different fence, a different cemetery. My brain shifted into factory mode. Facts, variables, mismatch. The photo was either a miracle or a fabrication. Fabrication is more common. The slideshow continued in my mind even while it remained paused. The young woman kept appearing. The young man kept appearing. The child kept appearing. Their faces did not register as anyone I knew. They never once visited Ray with me. They never appeared in any family story. No neighbor ever mentioned them during the funeral. The slideshow carried another detail that looked innocent to most people, and a sharp scream rose danger to me. Several photos had captions, not dates, not locations, not names. Captions like these, always there, family first, never alone, protected and cared for, protected and cared for. A phrase that sounded like comfort, a phrase that sounded like paperwork. A thought formed, slow and ugly. Someone was building a narrative. That narrative would not exist just for a funeral slideshow. That narrative would exist for institutions, for banks, for courts, for probate, for guardianship, for control. I closed the laptop and sat at the table, coffee untouched. The house felt colder, not from winter, from realization. Grief had made me vulnerable. Someone had noticed. Someone had prepared a rope and wrapped it in piano music. I needed more than a feeling. I needed proof. The first proof lived inside the file itself. I right-clicked the video and opened its properties. The file's creation date appeared, 3 weeks earlier. Not recent enough to be a last-minute memorial project. The software listed in the metadata, an editing program that cost money and required knowledge. Ray never spent money on software. Ray never learned video editing. The second proof needed the raw photos. No raw photos existed in the folder. Only the final video. A final export is what gets sent when someone does not want you to see layers. Layers contain truth. Original timestamps, device models, location tags, editing history. I copied the file onto my hard drive and created duplicates in 2 separate places, one on a cloud folder, one on an external drive. Evidence always deserves redundancy. Then I contacted the funeral director. A polite email request went out. The padded envelope, the courier details, any camera footage from the front desk. The funeral home had security cameras. Most do, for obvious reasons. The request stayed calm and neutral, framed as family curiosity. While waiting, I contacted the county probate court clerk in Ohio. A simple question: whether any filings had begun connected to Ray's estate. The clerk confirmed an initial probate notice had been opened 3 days earlier. Not by me, not by the funeral home, not by an attorney in my name. A petitioner name appeared. Veronica Pierce, a name that meant nothing to me. The clerk described Veronica as a concerned companion and caregiver. The petition claimed Ray had intended to name Veronica as a representative of his affairs due to lack of nearby family involvement. The petition included a request for temporary authority to manage property maintenance and protect assets from neglect. Temporary authority. That phrase again. Protected and cared for. My heart thumped once, heavy and slow. The slideshow was not a memorial. The slideshow was a weapon aimed at a judge's emotions, a judge who sees hundreds of cases, a judge who hears the same stories every week, a judge who might grant temporary power if the narrative looks clean enough and the family looks absent enough. The photos were not meant to impress me. They were meant to replace me. I needed an attorney fast. Elder law and probate, not general practice. Someone who knew how predators move through legal systems. Someone who understood that kindness often arrives first. A call went out the next morning to a probate attorney in Ohio with strong reviews and a background in contested estates. Her name was Evelyn Corbett. Her voice carried steel. The kind of steel that comes from seeing the same cruelty dressed up in different outfits for years. Evelyn reviewed the basics and moved immediately into strategy. File an appearance in court as next of kin. Request a stay on any temporary authority orders. Demand disclosure of supporting evidence for Veronica's petition. Subpoena the slideshow source. Subpoena the original photos. Subpoena the courier information. Subpoena any medical or caregiving documents attached to Veronica's claim. Evelyn also offered a phrase that lodged into my mind. Fabricated caregiving narratives are common. Photos are often staged. The goal is speed. Speed beats truth if truth arrives late. Truth needed to arrive early. Evelyn filed paperwork that afternoon. I signed what I needed to sign, then waited with an anxiety that felt like waiting for a test result. While Evelyn handled court filings, I handled the slideshow. The video itself contained clues beyond the headstone mismatch. Faces, lighting, background details, reflections. A photo of Ray in a kitchen showed a magnet on the refrigerator shaped like a palm tree with the words, Clearwater Beach. Ray never traveled to Florida. That magnet could have come from anyone. Still, it was a breadcrumb. Another photo showed a wall clock with a brand logo that I recognized from a chain store in Texas. Ray never shopped in Texas. Most people miss those details. Factory eyes do not. Another photo showed Ray standing beside a mailbox with a house number visible, 1142. Ray's house number in Ohio was 318. Either he moved, or the photo happened at someone else's home. Another mismatch. The young woman appeared again and again, always close to Ray, always with the same hairstyle, always with the same jewelry, a small crescent pendant on a thin chain. The pendant appeared in every frame like a signature, a brand mark, a deliberate consistency that looked more like a costume choice than real life. Then the child. A little boy with a gap between his front teeth and a red dinosaur hoodie. The boy appeared in 3 different holiday photos, each one supposedly a different year, yet the hoodie remained identical, and the boy's face looked the same age in all of them. Children change fast, gaps close, growth shows, not here, editing, staging, a story built like a set. My stomach hardened into resolve. The next step required help from someone more specialized than a retiree with suspicion. Digital forensics. Claire, my daughter, worked in corporate compliance and had connections. Not the glamorous kind, the useful kind. She connected me with a friend in Dallas who worked in cybersecurity and forensics, Daniel Sato. Daniel reviewed the video file and explained the limits. A final MP4 file strips much of the original photo metadata. Still, Daniel could analyze frame artifacts, compression patterns, and signs of compositing. The results arrived within a day. Multiple frames showed edge halos around faces consistent with cut and paste compositing. Lighting direction mismatched between Ray and the people beside him in several images. 2 different photos shared identical background noise patterns, suggesting the same base image reused with different overlays. The graveyard photo showed high probability of background replacement. Not definitive proof alone, but strong enough to raise serious questions in court. Daniel also offered another suggestion: reverse search the faces and objects from the slideshow through public databases and image search tools. A search began with the most consistent clue: the crescent pendant. Within an hour, a match appeared in a boutique listing online. The pendant had been sold through a small store in suburban Toledo. The listing included customer review photos. One review photo showed the pendant on the neck of a woman with bright eyes and the same smile. The review profile name, Veronica Pierce. A cold pulse moved through my chest. Veronica was real. Veronica built the slideshow. Veronica left fingerprints everywhere because she assumed no one would look. Another search focused on the kitchen photo with the Clearwater magnet. A reverse image search found a real estate listing photo from 2 years earlier. A kitchen in Toledo. A white refrigerator with the same magnet in the same position. The listing belonged to a rental property managed by Pierce Family Holdings, LLC. The family holiday table background matched another listing. A dining room with a distinctive hanging lamp and a wallpaper pattern. Again, a Pierce-linked property. Ray did not have a warm family life. Ray had been placed into someone else's life like a prop. The slideshow was not a record. It was a stage. Evelyn prepared to use all of it, but one missing piece still mattered. Why Ray? Why now? The answer likely lived in Ray's assets. I requested a preliminary inventory through court records and county property databases. Ray owned his house outright. Ray owned 2 parcels of farmland inherited from his parents. Ray also owned mineral rights attached to 1 parcel. The mineral rights had a lease. The lease payments were modest, but consistent, enough to attract a certain type of opportunist. In addition, Ray had a life insurance policy, not large, but significant enough to motivate fraud if access could be gained quickly. An estate like that becomes a target when the owner is isolated. Veronica targeted isolation. Veronica targeted speed. Veronica targeted paperwork. The hearing date arrived fast. Temporary authority requests move quickly because judges do not want vacant houses, unpaid bills, or assets deteriorating. That urgency becomes an opening for predators. The courthouse in Ohio felt like every courthouse, pale walls and fluorescent lights, and a line of people carrying folders filled with private lives. I sat beside Evelyn with my hands folded, trying to control my breathing. Across the room, Veronica sat in a neat coat with careful makeup and an expression designed to signal heartbreak and loyalty. Beside her sat a young man in a baseball cap and a child with a dinosaur hoodie. The same faces from the slideshow, now in person, deployed like living exhibits. Veronica held a binder thick enough to look responsible. The judge entered. The room stood. The case began. Veronica's petition framed a narrative. Years of companionship, caregiving during Ray's declining health, family abandonment, a desire to honor Ray's wishes, a hope to keep the home maintained, a request for temporary authority until probate concluded. The binder opened and the slideshow appeared on a screen. Piano music began again, this time in a courtroom. The photos faded in and out. The judge watched, the clerk watched. A few other people in the room watched with the human reaction Veronica wanted. Softening, sympathy, acceptance of a warm story. Then Evelyn stood and presented a different reality. The probate filings showed next of kin existed and had appeared immediately. The slideshow's graveyard photo showed a headstone from Pennsylvania inside an Ohio cemetery. The video file creation date occurred weeks before Ray's death. The editing software indicated professional construction. The background environments matched Pierce-owned rental listings. The pendant matched Veronica's own review photo online. The child's repeated hoodie across different years indicated staging. Digital forensics indicated compositing. Evelyn presented the evidence calmly, like a person laying parts on a table one by one, until the machine's failure becomes obvious. Veronica's expression shifted, not into anger, not into panic, into controlled surprise, like a performer whose script has been interrupted, but who still believes she can salvage the scene. The judge paused the slideshow. The judge's eyes moved from Veronica to Evelyn to me. A question arrived from the bench in a tone that did not carry warmth. Where did the original photos come from? Veronica claimed a family friend had compiled them. A volunteer, someone from church, a person who wanted to help memorialize Ray. Evelyn requested a name. A name did not arrive quickly enough. Evelyn requested the raw photo files and the device used to capture them. Veronica's binder did not contain raw files. Veronica's binder contained prints. Prints are easy to fabricate. Evelyn requested proof of caregiving. Medical records, receipts, home health documentation, pharmacy pickups, appointment calendars. Veronica's binder contained handwritten logs. Handwritten logs are easy to fabricate. Evelyn requested proof of legal relationship, power of attorney, signed caregiver agreement, beneficiary designations, witnessed will updates. Veronica's binder contained nothing with Ray's notarized signature. Veronica's story began to collapse under its own lack of concrete structure. Then Evelyn delivered the pivot that turned the room from sympathy to scrutiny. The funeral home envelope, the courier, the security footage request. The funeral home director had provided footage of the courier drop-off. The footage showed a woman in a gray coat with a crescent pendant and a man in a baseball cap, the same people now sitting in the courtroom. The judge watched the clip twice. The courtroom's temperature changed. Veronica's narrative had shifted from warm memorial to intentional evidence placement. The judge denied temporary authority immediately. The judge issued an order for Veronica to produce devices and original photo sources. The judge issued a referral to the county prosecutor's office for potential fraud and misrepresentation. The judge also issued a no-contact order, preventing Veronica from entering Ray's property or interfering with mail and documents. It should have felt like relief. It felt like a door had merely closed on the first room of a larger house. Predators rarely stop after the first failed attempt. They pivot. The pivot arrived within 48 hours. A locksmith invoice appeared on Ray's property address. An attempt to change locks. An attempt to secure the home. The locksmith refused once the court order surfaced, but the attempt itself showed intent. Then a second move, quieter and more dangerous. A bank notification to Ray's old mailing address. A request for account access updates. A reset attempt. Evelyn moved again, faster than a person expects an attorney to move. Subpoenas, bank holds, fraud alerts, credit freezes on Ray's identity, requests to redirect mail to a secure address. I drove back to Pennsylvania with a thick folder and a heavier mind. The slideshow sat on my laptop like a loaded device. It was still a memorial in form, but it had become something else entirely. Proof of how quickly someone could manufacture love on paper and almost win. That night, the phone rang with an unknown Ohio number. The voicemail arrived with a warm tone and a careful offer to work together and avoid court ugliness. The voice belonged to Veronica. The message framed her as misunderstood and generous. The message leaned toward negotiation, which meant she still believed she could turn this into a win. Evelyn's advice remained clear. No engagement, only documentation, only legal channels. Days passed, then weeks. Veronica's criminal exposure grew as investigators pulled threads. The courier footage tied her to the funeral home delivery. The real estate listing links tied her photos to her properties. Daniel's forensics supported the compositing claims. The court order forced device production, and those devices carried editing project files with layers still intact. Layers hold the truth. Project files hold intent. The prosecutor filed charges: attempted fraud, falsifying evidence, interference with probate, identity misuse attempts. Veronica's perfect family vanished from social media. Accounts went private. Profiles disappeared. The dinosaur hoodie no longer appeared in staged holiday photos. Still, the most important question remained unresolved in my heart. Why did Ray never reach out? Why did Ray allow a predator close enough to stage a whole life around him? The answer arrived in a small cardboard box found in Ray's bedroom during the court-authorized property inventory. Inside, letters, unsent letters, dozens of them. Envelopes addressed to me. Envelopes addressed to my father, already gone. Envelopes addressed to Claire and Mark. Envelopes addressed to people Ray never dared contact directly. Each envelope carried a date. Each envelope carried a weight. Ray had wanted family. Ray had been too proud to request it. Ray had been too rigid to admit loneliness. The letters contained fragments of regret, not poetry, not emotional declarations. Ray's words remained blunt, but underneath the bluntness lived something raw. Fear of dying alone, fear of being a burden, fear of admitting he needed anyone. One letter in particular carried the core truth. Ray had noticed Veronica months earlier in town, a friendly woman, helpful, efficient, a person who offered rides, a person who offered company, a person who offered to handle small paperwork. Ray had accepted at first because independence can become a prison when the body slows down. Ray had then noticed the pressure: beneficiary talk, account updates, requests for signatures, hints about protecting assets. Ray had grown suspicious and begun writing letters as a way to reach out without facing his own pride. He never mailed them. Then he got sick. Then he died. A predator thrives in the space between pride and isolation. Reading Ray's letters felt like reading the blueprint of a building that collapsed. Not because the materials were weak, but because the supports were missing in the one place they mattered. The letters also contained a final detail that twisted the story in a way I did not expect. Ray knew about Lorna. He knew she had passed. He knew I was alone. He left something in the safe deposit box at the bank in Toledo. Something meant for me, something meant as a final act of family, even if he never managed to act like family in life. Evelyn arranged access to the safe deposit box through probate authority. I traveled to Toledo again, walked into the bank with a folder of documents, and watched a banker open a steel box with careful hands. Inside, a single envelope and a thin photo album. The envelope carried my name in Ray's handwriting. Inside the envelope, a handwritten note, short and blunt as expected, but sharp enough to cut. The note explained that Ray's farmland mineral lease payments had been set aside for years, invested, grown. Ray never lived large. Ray lived small. He saved. He planned. He never trusted anyone near his accounts until his health declined and he felt himself slowing down. The note contained a confession: fear of ending up helpless, fear of being taken advantage of, fear that his own rigidity had pushed family away until the only people near him were the wrong ones. The note also contained an apology. Not a warm apology, a Ray apology. A sentence with no decoration and no excuses. Then the photo album. It contained real photos. Not staged, not cinematic, not edited. Old family photos from decades earlier. My father and Ray as boys. My father holding me at a picnic. Ray standing behind my mother with a stiff smile. The kind of smile a proud man wears when he refuses to appear soft. A photo of Ray and Lorna at our wedding. A snapshot I did not remember existing. Ray had attended. Ray had stood in the back. Ray had kept the photo all these years. Then the final page of the album held a recent photo. Ray alone at his kitchen table, holding one of his unsent letters, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not hard, an expression that looked tired, an expression that looked human. A wave of grief moved through me, different from the grief for Lorna. This grief carried anger too, anger at wasted time, at stubborn pride, at predators who find cracks in lonely lives. Then another page in the album, tucked in the back cover like a secret. A funeral photo, not the staged one, a real one. Ray standing at my mother's graveside in Pittsburgh, alone. No Veronica, no family. The background matched the cemetery. The slope matched. The trees matched. The photo had been taken years ago. Ray had visited. Ray had cared. The staged slideshow photo had stolen that truth and tried to repurpose it to steal everything else. I understood then why the staged photo had hit me so hard. It was close enough to the truth to be believable. The best lies borrow reality. The estate process took months. Courts move slowly once fraud enters the picture, because each motion triggers more checks, more signatures, more verification. Veronica's attempt forced layers of scrutiny that protected Ray's assets better than Ray ever could alone. Eventually, the court confirmed me as sole heir. Ray's assets were not vast compared to the fantasies people sell online, but they were significant. A paid-off home, land parcels, mineral lease income, investments grown over years of careful discipline. Most importantly, they were not Veronica's. Then the final twist arrived. Not from Veronica, but from the prosecutor's investigation. Veronica's scheme did not begin with Ray. Ray had been one of five older individuals in 3 counties, 5 memorial slideshows built to establish family closeness and caregiver devotion, 5 attempts to secure temporary authority before next of kin could act, 5 sets of staged holiday photos, staged medical visits, staged family dinners. Each time the props changed, the faces shifted, but the method remained identical. The slideshow was not just a weapon aimed at a judge. It was a product, a repeatable product, built to manufacture emotions in court. The prosecutor expanded charges into a larger fraud case. Investigators connected Veronica to an informal network. A few helpers, a courier, a photographer, a notary willing to forget details when money appeared. The cases moved forward on separate tracks, but the pattern became public enough to warn others. A local news article described deepfake-style memorial evidence and staged caregiving narratives. The article mentioned a USB drive delivered to a funeral home and a headstone mismatch discovered by a relative with a sharp eye. My name stayed out of the article by choice. The lesson mattered more than credit. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at Lorna's mug. The house still carried silence, but it no longer carried the same helplessness. I had survived grief. I had survived a legal ambush built from piano music and pretty pictures. I had learned a lesson I never wanted. A person can steal more than money. A person can steal your story. Veronica tried to replace me with a slideshow version of family, a version where I never showed up, a version where Ray's loneliness became her opportunity, a version where truth was disposable. That attempt failed because of one detail a predator cannot fully control. Reality leaves fingerprints, a wrong cemetery fence, a repeating hoodie, a magnet on a refrigerator, a pendant worn too consistently, a file creation date, a rental listing background, a courier camera angle, a stubborn old man trained to spot defects. The final decision about Ray's inheritance came in the quiet after everything legal settled. I could have kept the assets and moved on. I could have treated it as a late reward for a complicated family history. A different choice felt more honest. Ray's note carried the core truth. Isolation creates targets. So the assets became something else. A small foundation built with Evelyn's guidance and Claire's compliance skills and Daniel's forensics contacts, focused on one thing: rapid response for seniors facing paperwork-based exploitation. Not charities that hand out checks, not slogans. A practical system. Emergency legal representation. Digital evidence capture. Credit freezes, mail security. Court interventions before temporary authority becomes permanent control. A hotline that answers fast. A list of vetted attorneys and investigators. Workshops at libraries and senior centers with one simple message: love never requires secrecy. Ray's name went on the foundation in a way Ray would have pretended to hate and secretly appreciated. The first case arrived within 3 weeks. A widower in Western Ohio receiving help from a friendly volunteer who kept misplacing his mail. A rumor about guardianship, a stack of forms, a calm voice behind it all, a pattern, the kind of pattern machines and people share. The widower's family arrived in time. The forms stopped. The control attempt died before it reached court. Months later, another case arrived. A USB drive at a funeral home, a slideshow, a smiling caregiver, a story built from photos. The funeral photo scam was spreading, because that is what scams do once they work even once. This time, it failed early, because warnings move faster than predators when people pay attention. The hardest part of the whole experience remained personal, not legal. Ray's unsent letters, Ray's apology, Ray's real graveside photo, Ray's final expression in that album. A man can live his whole life too proud to reach for family, then finally reach too late. I could not rewrite that part. I could only learn from it. So the calls with Mark and Claire became more frequent, not out of fear, out of choice. The baby photos from Mark began arriving to my P.O. box instead of my porch. The voice notes from Claire arrived during my walks with headphones on, the kind of modern intimacy that distance allows. The house still carried loss. The house also carried a new awareness. Community can protect, but community can also exploit. The difference is consent and transparency. A perfect neighbor, a perfect caregiver, a perfect companion, a perfect funeral slideshow. Perfection is often the warning. Because real love looks messy sometimes. Real love arrives with awkward conversations. Real love does not need staged photos to prove itself. The funeral photo almost erased my place in my own family story. A single mismatch brought it down. If this story ever reaches someone who is grieving, someone who has a neighbor who feels too helpful, someone who receives a folder of forms for protection, someone who notices their phone calls getting interrupted and their mail getting opened, remember this. The first move is rarely theft. The first move is isolation. Then the paperwork arrives, and a perfect photo can be the sharpest knife in the room.